This morning we're going to talk about judging. So, in the Christian scriptures and in just churchianity in general, we know that Christians like to repeat that no Christian should judge anyone. And, like for example, we have in Matthew chapter 7 verse 1, "Judge not that you be not judged." And to continue, "For with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get." And then Luke chapter 6 verse 37, parallel, "Judge not and you will not be judged, condemn not and you will not be condemned, forgive and you will be forgiven." So that's all well and good. And we know that for Christians, Jesus, so-called Jesus, is the example that they follow and the one that they seek to emulate. They couldn't seem to figure it out with written commandments, so they needed to have someone they could imitate, but the only way that they're able to imitate him is by reading about him in the so-called Gospels, good news accounts, and then imitating him based on what they read about him saying and doing there. And you know what? When I was young and I was reading the Gospels in depth, I became pretty judgmental in an attempt to imitate Jesus. And why is that? Well, mostly it's because of his many condemnations of the Pharisees, the scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, he calls them. He has some words for the Sadducees also, but mostly seems to have a beef with the scribes and the Pharisees. Why the scribes? I don't know. Probably maybe based on a little popular proof text from, I think it's Jeremiah, about the line pen of the scribes. But scribes, they just copy things exactly the way they find them in Judaism. So why you would be after the scribes, and accusing them of hypocrisy. He doesn't really go into any explicit offenses that the scribes are committing. So why he lumps the scribes in with the Pharisees, whose offenses he does seem to try to go into detail about, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why scribes are being mentioned there. Except for the fact that usually the scribes are literal children of Israel. So whereas Jesus seems to have all kinds of permissions and allowances he's willing to extend to even the basest sort of people, he has no, or at least extremely little, very, very little, mercy to extend towards the literal children of Israel, the Jews. Which is really strange coming from someone who's supposed to be the Jewish Messiah. But when you know, as we now know, that Jesus is merely a literary disguise for Titus Flavius, the Roman general who eventually ascended to the imperial throne, became not just the emperor of the Roman Empire at the time, there in the first century, but also the Roman state cult god. It's been said that he was a form of sun god for the Romans. So it would be perfectly natural for a Roman general who went from town to town, village to village, city to city in Galilee and Judea, exterminating Jewish men, women, even pregnant women and children, to have lots of hatred and accusations he wished to level at the Jewish people. And why the Pharisees? Well, despite the picture of religious extremism that the New Testament's portrayal of the Pharisees suggests, Flavius Josephus makes it pretty clear that the Pharisees were moderates, and that they were sort of the glue that was holding the Jewish community together during this Roman occupation. And there's even a key event where the Romans exterminate a whole bunch of Pharisees, and there's and another event I can think of. It might have been what led to the extermination, I forget, where there's a controversy about whether the Pharisees are greeting the Romans on horseback or not, and like on the one hand they were instructed to either greet them or not greet them, which was exactly the opposite of what the Romans expected. Like they were instructed to do this in order to have better relations with the Romans. Some cynical person suggested this, but then the Romans in question were expecting them to do exactly the opposite, and were ready to take it as a sign that they were being disrespectful if they didn't do what they were expecting. So it was a setup, and it was one of the provocations the Romans carried out against the Jews that led to the Roman war with the Jews that ultimately led to the siege and eventual sacking of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and the carrying off of hundreds of thousands of Jews into slavery throughout the empire. It's a matter of history that the Romans provoked the Jews to this war on numerous occasions. So, people like to say, oh, well, it's obviously because either the Jews were sinful, or, like Christians will want to say, oh, it was because the Jews rejected Jesus, even though, like, it happens like some 37 years after Jesus is supposed to have died, right? So, Jesus in the Christian scriptures, he spends a lot of time judging the Jews very harshly. And what's kind of silly is that a lot of his criticisms were criticisms the Jewish community even had about itself, not in an effort to be unloving to its brothers and sisters, but in order to improve in their piety towards the Creator. And if the Pharisees and scribes, Sopharim, and Sadducees were guilty of all these things of which they're being accused by Jesus, then one thing is clear, and that is that they took those criticisms to heart and made an effort to reform their behavior. Nevertheless, because Jewish history and teaching has been suppressed by the Gentile world for the last almost 2,000 years, we never get an update on this situation to find out that, oh yeah, Jews have actually made an effort to improve in these areas. So what we get is a time capsule preserved almost in amber of these condemnations leveled at the Pharisees, so that we get a constant day after day revival of this perception of Jews as being as evil as Jesus is here criticizing them of being. So this is all very, very judgmental, okay? So on the one hand, where Jesus says, "Judge not, that ye be not judged," at the same time, while he's still walking on the earth and isn't even dead yet, hasn't ascended to heaven, he's doing a lot of judging. And, his explanation for that is, I think, in John, where he says, "The Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to me." The word in Greek is for judge is krino, but in Hebrew it's shaphat. And what does it say in Genesis chapter 18, verse 25? Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? That's speaking of the Creator. So here in Genesis 18:25, the Father is the judge of all the earth. But we're supposed to believe that in John that the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment to the Son. And then in verse 30, "I can do nothing of my own authority. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just. As I hear, I judge." So here he's saying that he's hearing, I guess, from the Creator, the judgment, that he says, well, the Father judges no one, but at the same time he hears, and that's how he judges. And you assume he's hearing from the Father, unless he's hearing from somebody else. "And my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me." Who sent him? This is Titus. He's talking about his father Vespasian, who ascended to the imperial throne before him, and who commenced the war against the Jews, and then left that war in the hands of Titus when he ascended to the imperial throne. This is the same man that it suggested Flavius Josephus identified as the fulfiller of the prophecy about the star arising out of Jacob, a messianic prophecy. It's taken to be a messianic prophecy, right? So, and whether that actually happened or not, who knows? Because Flavius Josephus is basically under house arrest and sponsored by the Flavians in Rome. That's assuming Flavius Josephus isn't ghost written by the Romans and never actually existed in the first place. That's a possibility I'm willing to entertain. But one thing is clear is that Flavius Josephus his writings are very different than those of the New Testament. His seem much more like an attempt at history, comparable to that of Herodotus, and less like some, what would you call it, work of propaganda that's trying to assign like divine aspects to a human being, as you have in the Christian scriptures. So the problem that arises is the same problem that arose with me, where in an attempt to emulate Jesus, I became more judgmental. So that not just Pharisees, but if anyone conducted themselves in a way that resembled any of the accusations leveled by Jesus against the Pharisees, well, then I would call that person a Pharisee. And still Christians do that to this day. They use the term Pharisee as an insult when in Judaism, especially at the time, Pharisee was not an insult. That was a person who was very pious in their devotion to the Creator. So it's not okay to judge Christians, and it's not okay to judge sinners, but it's very much okay to judge Jews and Pharisees if we're imitating the Jesus of the Christian scriptures, what I call the Christian addendum, what Christians call the New Testament. And that continues in another way, where you have non-Jews today judging Jews for commandments that they neither understand, that is, that they, the non-Jews, neither understand nor are required to keep. For example, like keeping kosher, separating meat and dairy, and the utensils used to cook either, keeping those separate in a kitchen that maybe has more than one oven or stove and more than one refrigerator. And then non-Jews hear about that, and their reaction is that, well, that's crazy. And they make no effort to understand why Jews are doing this. They certainly don't extend to them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they're doing this in order to fulfill a commandment from the Creator. They just assume that these are traditions and commandments of men, as one of the accusations leveled by Jesus calls them. But at the same time, when it comes to Gentile law, non-Jewish law, in whatever land, the Christian scripture says, no, you need to obey the Gentile government servants and their laws because they are servants appointed by God. Well, what about the servants in the Jewish community, in the Jewish nation? Of course, they didn't have to worry about that so much at the time of those writings because the Romans had already destroyed it, right? All you had in the land were, remnants of the children of Israel, and no nation that, was operating under its own autonomy. So there was no, you didn't even have to consider the scenario that, okay, well, does submitting to the servants of the government that the Creator has appointed, does that also apply in a Jewish nation? They didn't have to consider that because the Romans had already destroyed it. But now that Israel is a state, does it still apply? So if the Knesset makes rulings that are in keeping with Jewish law, and a Christian is in the state of Israel, geographically within its borders, does the Christian have to obey those servants of God, the servants of the Israeli government that have, according to Christian scripture, been appointed by God? I don't even know. I don't know what messianics and Christian evangelists think about that inside the borders of geographical Israel. Maybe someone who lives there can tell me. I would think it would result in some contradictions between one Christian doctrine and another, given that there is no historical context for the existence of a Jewish nation operating at the time those writings were made. So It's kind of akin to how Westerners or even Americans will look at various practices of their fellow Christians in the Amish community or in the Mennonite community, and they'll say, "Oh, that's crazy." And the reason is because they just don't want to do those things, so they condemn it. They don't make any effort to understand it. They just condemn it because they don't want anything to do with it. Now, conversely, in Judaism, Jews relish the opportunity to do a commandment of the Torah. It's an opportunity, and not just that, it's an honor, because the Torah is considered a royal Torah from the King of the universe, from heaven. So it's considered an honor to be able to do a commandment. Whereas in the Christian scriptures, the law is so burdensome, and who can do it? It's impossible to keep. It's a burden that no one could keep. But in Judaism, it's not a burden. It's an honor to do those commandments, and Jews do them every day. So, when did the Creator command that non-Jews should judge Jews? It's not in the Hebrew Tanakh. There's nothing there that says that non-Jews should judge Jews. What there is in the Christian scriptures is you have the 12 apostles, and only 12 apostles are appointed in some future time to judge each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And where the other tribes are going to come from, I don't know, because the returnees from the Babylonian captivity were primarily Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. And of course there may have been individual representatives of the other tribes who were in the southern kingdom of Judah when they went off into the captivity in Babylon. And so maybe in that sense, when those returnees from Babylon, maybe there's some numbered there that are representatives of other tribes of Israel. I don't know, but I guess that might be some kind of Christian prophecy about the return of the other tribes of Israel. But it's clear that the 12 apostles, so-called, except for Judas, it would be his replacement, were appointed to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. You could say, well, in Revelation, that's actually that's actually symbolism, but it's said pretty explicitly by Jesus himself in the Christian scriptures that you may eat and drink at my table and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I think in Matthew it might be even more explicit. Matthew 19:28, truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man shall sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So there, it's okay to judge Israel, obviously, after he's just said, judge not that ye be not judged. I guess he's saying, at a later time, don't worry, I'll take care of you. You'll have a job, and I'll make sure you're set up nicely. You'll have a nice cushy position where you'll be judging the 12 tribes of Israel. But I don't know if he says anything here about judging the non-Jews. But then along comes Paul later, and I guess he's supposed to be the 13th apostle. His name actually refers to the diaspora where non-Jews live, so I guess he's supposed to be the apostle to the Gentiles, as I think he says as much, maybe. Let me see. Yeah, Romans chapter 11:13. For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine own office. So Paul couldn't claim the office of one of the 12, right? So he had to come along and claim to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And then, let's see, teacher of the Gentiles, he says, 2 Timothy, assuming that's not spurious. And then in 1 Timothy, he says he's a teacher of the Gentiles, ordained a preacher and an apostle and a teacher of the Gentiles in 1 Timothy 2:7. So I think somewhere Paul says something that he's like one born out of season. So he couldn't claim to be one of the apostles actually picked by Jesus. So he had to say, "Oh, I was a late term, not quite an abortion, although I would call him that. He was a late birth, right?" Excuse me. So we can talk about Paul more later. There's a lot there to unpack. So non-Jews, they just don't give Jews the benefit of the doubt. They think they're going to be judging fleshly Israel in the world to come, and why not get some practice doing it right now? So yeah, instead of giving Jews the benefit of the doubt, they'll extend the benefit of the doubt to criminals, even, like practicers of sin, habitual practitioners of sin. They will give them the benefit of the doubt, but the Jews cut them no slack, right, Christians? And why is that? Well, it's because Christianity is a replacement for Judaism. It's a counterfeit Judaism, just like Islam is a counterfeit Judaism. And that's why these two religions go after the Jews, because they know that Judaism has the claim to antiquity. Judaism came first. Judaism is the original, and Christianity and Islam are the counterfeits. That's why they have to attack and undermine Judaism and the Jewish people, and do so on a daily basis, constantly, without relenting. So we know one thing, and that is that in the Christian scriptures, let's go a little bit more into the Quran and what we're talking about as far as Islam judging the Jews. They like to bring up this little story. During the night, the Jews collected the fish after the Sabbath ended. When they did that, Allah changed them from humans into monkeys, the animals having the form closest to humans. Their evil deeds and deceit appeared lawful on the surface, but they were in reality wicked. And this is a popular pastime with non-Jews. They'll take one offense done by maybe even an individual, and they'll use that as a as a prototype or a poster child for the whole Jewish people throughout the ages, right? So if one Jew, for example, by the name of Bernie Madoff, right, engaged in some fraud and stole money from people, just like any other Gentile might do, right? They're going to keep bringing up that story day after day as if it's a proof that all Jews throughout all the ages are evil and will do the same thing to you. They will not do this to Gentiles. Gentiles, they'll cut them slack. But if a single Jew does a single thing, they'll keep bringing that up year after year to attack the Jewish people with it. And that's this story that's popular in Islam. So here, let's go more into it. So this is from Hadith of the Day. Hadith of the Day, the Sabbath Breakers, Part 1. So, anyway, it goes into quite a lot of detail about this story, but the passage from the Quran, Al-Quran 7:163, says, and ask them, O Muhammad, I guess that's supposed to be peace be upon him or something, about the town that was by the sea when they can't even tell you when that was, when they transgressed in the matter of the Sabbath, when their fish came to them openly on the Sabbath day and did not come to them on the day they had no Sabbath. Thus we made a trial of them, or a test of them, I guess, for they used to rebel against Allah's command. So what's strange here is, like, here they're acknowledging that the Creator commanded that the Sabbath was Saturday for the children of Israel. But then along comes Islam, and that's no longer the case. Just like in Christianity, you don't have to worry about the Sabbath anymore in Christianity, right? Proof that these two religions are counterfeits and attacks upon Judaism to undermine the Torah. Because what does the Torah say? It says, remember the Sabbath. You're not to forget it. You're not to stop observing it, the children of Israel. So this is like one particular incident presented from an ignorant Gentile perspective. No effort is being made to find out really whether this actually happened or why it happened. It says in this explanation here on this page that what they did is they put out nets on Friday and then they gathered the fish on Saturday, and they say that this is a violation of the Sabbath. Did they go to any Jewish Torah scholars to ask them whether this was a violation of the Sabbath? Personally, I don't know. I can't tell you whether it is a violation of the Sabbath or not. But the way it sounds is it sounds like it might not be a violation at all. And would the fish die if they were caught in the net, if they were still in the water and could breathe through their gills? I don't know. But anyway, so what we have, though, are non-Jews who don't observe the Sabbath, who are offended by Jews who are commanded to observe the Sabbath, and they see them supposedly breaking the Sabbath, and then forevermore the Quran is going to bring up this story. And what is the purpose of this? It's not because the Jews maybe didn't pay their debt for any sin that they might have done in doing this, if this actually happened and was against the Torah. This is to continuously bring up the accusation in order to characterize the Jews as evil and as the old done away with system. So that you could say, see, it's really Islam that's the new and better thing. This is the church of what's happening now. Again, no effort made to give the Jews the benefit of the doubt. No effort to consult with Torah scholars to find out if this was an infraction against the Torah. It's just a nice story that we can repeat to assassinate the character of the Jewish people. So judging. Is it good or is it bad? Should we do it? Should we not? If you're someone who's trying to protect your family And let's even keep it in a Christian context. If you're a shepherd and you're trying to protect the sheep in your flock, do you judge between wolves and your shepherding dogs? Do you discern between the two? Do you, by the behavior of the wolves, differentiate them from the shepherd dogs and their behavior? So discernment is really important, and it's necessary to judge between righteousness and evil, wickedness. In fact, children are described as not knowing the difference between their right and their left. Let's see, like in Jonah chapter 4 verse 11, and should not I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? So Nineveh, this is a Gentile city. So these people didn't know their right hand from their left. They didn't know the difference between good and evil. It says in 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 9, give thy servant therefore an understanding mind to govern, the word there is judge, thy people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this thy great people? So judgment is just a fact of life. It's something that we engage in every day, and it's something that's necessary. One of the things that's plaguing America right now is that the opposite of judgment is happening, whereas criminals and lawbreakers are being rewarded, and those who are law-abiding and who uphold the law are being punished. If a child is bullied in school, the bullies are being rewarded, and the bullied person, the victim, who reports the incident, is being punished. There are anecdotes of this happening, reports of this happening all over the country. We see it on a daily basis where illegal aliens are being rewarded with things that our government, who cried poor mouth before, didn't extend to actual law-abiding citizens of this country. But now these lawbreakers have come into the country, and our government is rewarding them with benefits that actual citizens have never had. This is the inversion of biblical justice, where good is called evil and evil is called good. And that's what's going on in our country. And it comes from this Western idea that you should not judge the criminal, but you should judge the law-abiding, Torah-observant person, be they a Jew or be they even a non-Jew who is keeping the so-called commandments of men in his country. So when Jesus says, do not judge, I don't pay any attention to that. It's not biblical. It's just some Christian concoction created by Roman sinners who didn't want to be judged themselves. So they taught their disciples not to judge them. It was just a way to placate the subjects, to further subject them to the oppression of their dominion. So, my advice to you is discern between good and evil, and discern between good and evil people. Gravitate towards good people and avoid evil people.